Good morning. This is Horizon's Middle East and Africa. Our top stories this morning. Asian equities rally following Wall Street's fresh record high. U.S. inflation data out later today is set to define Fed policy in the coming months. San Francisco Fed President Mary Daly expects one or two more 25 basis point cuts this year. That's after FOMC minutes shows some policymakers favored a smaller move. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaks with President Biden more than a month. They discuss Lebanon, Gaza, and Iran. Plus, Hurricane Milton slams into Florida's west coast as a Category 3 storm. It's moving inland with tree-snapping winds and flash flooding, leaving millions without power. It's just gone 8 a.m. across the Emirates. I'm Johanna Bersachi in Dubai. Once again, we have a really packed show for you. But first, as ever, starting with markets, because we got yet another record high for the S&P. And guess what? This is the 44th record high for the index this year. Really on a strong running streak. Close to record highs as well for other indices. But generally, the momentum has been positive. A lot of eyes yesterday on those FOMC minutes. And the fact there was a little bit of pushback from some members of the committee vis-a-vis that jumbo rate cut. Not all members were on board with 50 basis points cut. Today, attention turns to CPI data. Expectation is that we will continue to see a moderation of this inflation data. And recently, as we know, the Fed's attention has been focused more on the labor component of their mandate as opposed to inflation, but still could be a key driver for markets here. So right now, S&P futures leaning sideways, not doing a lot, but coming off these all-time highs. 10-year yields after FOMC minutes yesterday, we moved about 5 basis points higher. Today, sitting at around 4.06%. Dollar yen, look at what has been going on there. We're almost back to 150 again. So the momentum with the USD continues. And actually was reading this morning, this is the biggest winning streak for the USD going all the way back to 2022. So strength in greenback continues to be a theme. Some people are saying US exceptionalism is back again. Strong stock markets, strong USD. Brent continues to be in focus, as we've been talking about. It's been a toss-up between the geopolitical premium being factored into these energy markets versus some of the signals coming through from China. And on the China front, we're going to talk about that shortly, but there is going to be a press conference this Saturday by the Finance Ministry. So again, expectations are building there about the possibility of further fiscal stimulus measures being announced. Switching over, today, a lot of focus in the U.S. around Hurricane Milton. It has made landfall. And I thought it was interesting to note here, just taking a look back at how well catastrophe bonds have actually done. I mean, this goes all the way back to 2005. It's the white line, and it tells you that it actually has outperformed some of these major global indices. But, of course, now with two hurricanes hitting in the space of 2 weeks, the losses are beginning to build up. And I was reading some estimates suggesting that on these catastrophe bonds themselves, losses could range between anything from 2% to 15%. So something to bear in mind there as we think about the impact that these hurricanes are having economically and financially. But let's go back to markets in Asia. Avril Hong is in our Singapore studio. And Avril, we are seeing a bit of a rebound from yesterday's session. Tell us more.
Yeah, we saw Chinese stocks yesterday. Based on the CSI 300 at least, it's worst showing in 4 years. We saw how quickly in the afternoon session, how stimulus speculation turned into stimulus skepticism as we keep an eye on that Saturday briefing from the Chinese finance minister. Hopefully fill in the blanks as to some of these support measures are concerned. For today, we are seeing, as you alluded to just a short while ago, a bit of those gains in the mainland stocks as well as the ones in Hong Kong, something that might be helping things along. The PBOC announcing today that eligible investors can start applying for tapping into the $70+ billion liquidity tool for the stock markets, and that seems to be lifting sentiment. Certainly we're seeing that being reflected in the Hang Seng as it went into the lunch break. The rest of Asia also seeing a fair bit of positivity, and this is thanks to what we saw on Wall Street and the S&P 500 clocking yet another record overnight. Jumana.
Yeah, a bit of a rebound there coming through. Avril, thank you so much for the overview from Singapore. Now, Hurricane Milton has made landfall in Florida as a Category 3 storm with warnings of extreme winds and a potentially life-threatening storm surge. Bloomberg weather reporter Mary Hu is following the story and joins us now. Mary, just give us the latest on the developments. Obviously, the hurricane has now made landfall. How much damage has it caused so far?
The hurricane, right, that make landfall as a Category 3 storm. The winds have since slowed a little bit, dipping it down to Category 2, but the storm is still packing devastating rains, a life-threatening storm surge, just pushing a wall of water into the Tampa Bay area and all along large areas of the western central coast of Florida, and along with that, damaging waves and also just extreme rainfall that will threaten flash flooding, urban flooding. So just all around the dangers and risks that comes with the rains, the waves, the storm surges, and the damaging winds, both hurricane force and tropical storm force, as Hurricane Milton continues moving inland across Florida and eventually out into the Atlantic probably later this week.
Mary, I was reading this morning that about 1 million people are sitting without power now. How long is it expected for that situation to persist?
Right, that number is expected to tick up, and we're just watching the power outage tracker now, and yeah, it's close to 2 million now. Even households, homes, and businesses out of power. It will probably take weeks, if not months. Some of the estimates from utilities in Florida are saying, and this comes, of course, just 2 weeks after Hurricane Helene also damaged the power infrastructure. So this really just packs on another layer of damages and pressure to really bring the systems back online.
Yeah, really stark images coming through now just as you're speaking. And I thought it was interesting to note that the losses estimates range from anything $60 billion to $75 billion. So we're talking about substantial sums here. And of course, the second hurricane to hit Florida in the space of a couple of weeks. Mary Hoy, thank you so much, our weather reporter in Hong Kong. Now, turning to some of the geopolitical news from the region, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has spoken with President Biden for the first time in more than a month. Biden affirmed Israel's right to protect its citizens from Hezbollah's missiles and rockets, while also stressing the need for a diplomatic solution in both Lebanon and Gaza. For more on this, Bloomberg's Dan Williams joins us from Jerusalem. Dan, so this was a highly anticipated call. We did get a readout of the call, but from what I can gather, no further information on this potential reprisal to Iran.
Indeed, there's a readout from the White House, which is very sparing on detail, not necessarily sparing on slogans, but on actual operational detail. We haven't learned very much. The Israelis have yet to put out their own account of this phone call that happened yesterday evening. One imagines that a part of the reason is operational secrecy. Israel is intent on retaliating for Iran's ballistic missile attack on it last week. The Americans have openly said that they would be in support of some kind of retaliation, although they've expressed misgivings about certain types of retaliation. Specifically, we hear retaliation against Iran's nuclear facilities or oil sector. So if there was a disagreement, it was probably about where exactly those bombs should fall. And I doubt the allies are likely to be putting out any details ahead of this happening, especially if it's imminent.
Yeah. Dan, I want to bring you a line from this readout that I think is worth flagging. On Gaza, the leaders discussed the urgent need to renew diplomacy to release the hostages held by Hamas. So still hope, potentially, for a diplomatic solution here?
There's been some revival of hope this week because the leader of Hamas, not just in Gaza, but outside Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, has surfaced after several weeks when he was described as being incommunicado, potentially killed or incapacitated by the Israeli barrage in the Gaza Strip. There is also some hope that given Israel's advances both against Hamas in Gaza and the allied Hezbollah in Lebanon, Sinwar may now see himself on a back foot and may want to cut a deal. So potentially is not to go the way of Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah leader who was assassinated by Israel with a very, very heavy bombardment that penetrated his underground bunker in Beirut. There is some movement there, potentially also encouraged by the Americans in order to head off a major escalation between Israel and Iran. The Israelis aren't talking much about the prospects for this. They don't seem especially encouraged. It's been now more than a year since those hostages were taken. Israel believes around half of those remaining in Gaza are dead. I think what they're waiting for is if Hamas to relent in its conditions, for Hamas to show to Israel's satisfaction, obviously, that it's in a disadvantaged position compared to where it was, say, a month ago, 2 months ago, and that it now recognizes that disadvantage and is willing to be more elastic, more flexible on its conditions.
Yeah, let's see. Bloomberg's Dan Williams in Jerusalem. Thank you as ever for your reporting. Now, still ahead, hear why Man Group says the Middle East has a front row seat for big shifts in the AI technology supply chain. That conversation next. This is Bloomberg.
I think that 2 more cuts this year or 1 more cut this year really spans the range of what is likely, in my mind, given my projection for the economy. But it's really important to put caveats with that.
San Francisco Fed President Mary Daly on the central bank's rate policy. The S&P 500 hit a record high in the run-up to today's September CPI report, with tech shares once again leading the charge. So to discuss this and more, I'm really happy to say that Sumant Wahi, a portfolio manager at Man Group, joins us around the set today. Good to have you with us.
Good morning.
Let's just talk about the momentum behind AI. There's been a massive hype in this space, obviously, for most part of this year. A bit of a pullback in the summer, but once again, things are on the rise again. And I guess, one side of the equation is that valuations are very rich. The other side of the equation is that earnings growth is still there, revenue growth is still very healthy for many of these AI-exposed stocks. Do you expect the positive momentum to continue?
Yes, I do expect that. In fact, this is a technology which has such immense potential. But also, this is a technology which is evolving or evolving at an astronomical pace. And I think that is very interesting because for enterprises, while they are fascinated by the possibilities, they're also taking a bit of a cautious step, rightly so, because if it is evolving at such a fast pace, we're not sure, or the enterprise is not sure, when it becomes a bit more predictable. We have had enough examples in the past where technologies, if they're inserted too early, they lead to unsavory outcomes.
Yeah.
So whilst we've seen a lot of growth on the semiconductor side, I believe if you look further down, the real value or opportunities are actually much more in software. So I do see opportunities, but probably not in where we've seen a lot of growth, but more nuance, more in the software side.
How closely do you monitor the macro and the fact that we spend all this time talking about how much the Fed are going to cut? Are they going to cut 50? Are they going to cut 25? The rate cutting cycle for next year. Does it matter, do you think, for these stories, or are they secular stories?
They are much more secular stories.
Yeah.
Of course, it matters a little bit on the valuation side because for a lot of these companies, half of the valuation or more is in the terminal value, and that gets impacted because of the rate cuts. But if you think fundamentally on a revenue level, these are structural growth stories. They get less impacted, maybe outside of e-commerce.
Yeah. One thing that we talk about a lot in the context of the global economy is this concept of geo-economic fragmentation and the fact that geopolitical concerns are beginning to impact everything from politics, of course, to economics to supply chains. And when you think about the way chips are made, they are the very definition, the embodiment of global supply chains, because many of these chips are designed in the US, manufactured in Taiwan, put together in China, etc. Do you expect these geopolitical developments to have a material impact on the supply chains for AI chips?
Absolutely. I've been following this industry for 2 decades. Never has politics been so much more important for tech sector as such, or for investing as now. And you correctly said it. Global tech supply chains work like one single organism. And at this moment of time, we've seen this march towards 2 centers, one a US-led center of tech supply chain and a Chinese-led tech center for supply chain. And I think the Middle East is a very interesting region from that perspective, because in the Middle East, we have a front row seat to this devolving tech supply chain. And it's only here in this region that you can actually see a made in and designed in US EV car or smartphone competing head-to-head on a level playing field without any of the tariffs involved with the Chinese smartphone or the Chinese EV cars, and compare and contrast and invest accordingly.
But does that actually lend itself to opportunities? Because at the same time, if you have export restrictions, for example, like the ones that are being introduced in Europe with ASML and the likes, is that not going to actually impact the revenue stream of some of these companies who've been told simply that they cannot deal or sell specific technology into China?
Absolutely, it will. But then that also leads to investment opportunities in China. I think Chinese semi-cap equipment supply chain is not investigated enough. I think there is an immense amount of opportunity in investing in that space, especially because, I mean, as we all know, necessity is the mother of all invention. Even if the Chinese economy, we can debate how much it grows or it doesn't grow, but the fact that it needs to be self-sufficient in semiconductor production means that there is a lot of investment opportunities in that region.
Yeah, specifically in the Middle East, what opportunities are you seeing in AI space? Because again, it is a very big theme over here. I've personally attended many AI conferences. They're very focused on making the UAE specifically an AI hub in the world. What do you see as an investor as the opportunities here?
Absolutely. I mean, on one, we just talked about the fact that they're front row seat to this revolution, so they have a very good insight. But also, if you take a step back and think, they are next door to some of the fastest growing economies in the world, with actually electricity prices, which are half of the prices you see in US, etc. And when you think about data centers, they're extremely power hungry. A third of the cost of running a data center is in cooling it. So if you think about the cost of electricity and how power hungry these AI data centers are, I think Middle East offers a very interesting opportunity to host some of these data centers as well.
Yeah, it's certainly something that they're planning for.
Absolutely.
And that makes all the difference, estate planning and the extent of the estate planning with their outlook. Sumant, Wahi, thank you so much for joining us on the show. That was Portfolio Manager at Man Group. Coming up, a study finds Uganda's anti-LGBTQ laws introduced last year have cost the country billions of dollars in losses. The details next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Shimana Bersachi in Dubai. A new study says Uganda's anti-LGBTQ laws have cost the nation as much as $1.6 billion in losses since being introduced in May last year. The legislation includes life imprisonment for certain sexual acts and, in some cases, the death penalty. For more on this, Bloomberg's Ondiro Ganga joins us now. Ondiro, first of all, tell us more about the cost of this anti-LGBTQ law in Uganda. Is there some hope for middle ground?
Jumana, immediately this law was passed, there was trickle-down effect that was felt. When it came to pass, the shilling lost the most it had ever lost in a period of 8 years. We saw the government saying that they were going to revise their 2023-2024 budget to capture the losses that they were going to accumulate after losing funding from the World Bank. And also the central bank cut rates immediately, saying that they needed to buffer their currency and also ensure that they make the most out of output. And as you put it rightly in the intro, 1.6 billion in compounded losses in just a period of a year. And these losses continue because there have been losses in international aid, foreign direct investment, tourism and trade that could total up to 3.2% of their GDP. And these losses do not stop there. They will continue compounding. In a period of 5 years, they could total up to $8.3 billion. And these losses will continue in foreign direct investment at about 75 million annually, and international aid at 1 billion. These are no small figures. These are numbers that could hurt the Ugandan economy if they're not hurting it already. So the government and the World Bank trying to find a middle ground. The World Bank rolling out measures to ensure that people from the queer community are part and parcel of projects that are rolled out by the World Bank, funded by the World Bank, and no new funding will come from the World Bank until they're certified that Uganda has put in place the correct measures to protect this community.
Wow. And it's not just Uganda. There were also protests in Ghana recently over the delayed assent of the controversial anti-LGBTQ bill over there. Tell us more about what's been happening in Ghana.
Jemana, so in 2023, February, this bill was passed in Parliament, but immediately it was passed. 2 lawsuits were filed in Ghanaian courts. One, an injunction to stop Parliament from sending this bill to the president to be ascended into law, and 2, challenging the constitutionality of this bill. And since then, the process has been in the courts and it has dragged out. And the Ghana Judicial Service says that this is because both sides need to complete their due diligence before hearing can commence. Protests have been happening in Ghana, led by politicians, religious bodies, and some civilians, laying blame on the Chief Justice, saying she's not hastening this judicial process to ensure that this bill is out of the courts and heads to the president. But these protests also come against the backdrop of other protests, protesting illegal mining in Ghana, high cost of living, high cost of energy, and a deteriorating currency. And this lays premise for how detrimental this bill could be if it becomes law. It would jeopardize funding from the World Bank, $3.8 billion, a $3 billion bailout package from the IMF, and also renegotiations and restructuring of their external debt of up to $20 billion. U.S. also says there could be trade and tourism sanctions that will have chilling effects on an economy that was almost on the brink of collapse 2 years ago before an IMF bailout.
Yeah, it just seems really defiant of them to be wanting to push through this bill, given the severe economic implications it could have also on the economy. Bloomberg's Ondiro Ganga, thank you so much for bringing us that story. Now, the Democratic Republic of Congo's top mining official says the country is looking to court new investors for its deposits of key metals. This is as it looks to diversify ownership in its industry away from China. Government plans are said to include streamlining processes to pay customs and taxes, along with a partnership with the UAE. The ambitions come as the country continues to play a key role in international metals markets, while also finding itself at the center of a contest between China, the US, and other countries vying for access to critical minerals. And a quick look at markets before we head to the break. What we got was a better handover from Asian equities overnight, a bounce for some of these indices heading into the weekend. Big day ahead coming for U.S. markets with that CPI print. We'll talk more about that shortly, but this is the picture now. S&P futures not doing much, coming off all-time record highs. The Nasdaq again trading flat. Euro stocks futures in Europe leaning slightly positive. Coming up, a new report finds the Middle East and North Africa is the only region seeing growth in funding across emerging venture markets. We explore what's driving interest in the region with Noor Sweid coming up. Good morning. This is Horizon's Middle East and Africa. Our top stories this morning. Asian equities rally following Wall Street's fresh record high. U.S. inflation data out later today is set to define Fed policy in the coming months. San Francisco Fed President Mary Daly expects 1 or 2 more 25 basis point cuts this year. That's after FOMC minutes shows that some policymakers favored a smaller move. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaks with President Biden for the first time in more than a month. They discuss Lebanon, Gaza, and Iran. Plus, Hurricane Milton slams into Florida's west coast as a Category 3 storm. It's moving inland with tree-snapping winds and flash flooding, leaving millions without power. It's just gone 8:30 a.m. across the Emirates. I'm Joanna Bersetchi in Dubai. Well, another record high for the S&P. It's 44th record high for the year. It's 12th record high in the last 3 months. So that stock market continues to go from strength to strength as we talk about the rebound in some of these tech names as well. Today, all eyes are going to be on that CPI print. Expected to show somewhat of a moderation. The headline figure, 0.1% month on month. The core figure, 0.2% month on month. But of course, as the Fed has been signaling, there's been more emphasis now on developments in the labor market as opposed to inflation data. That being said, it is going to be crucial to determine Fed trajectory from here. S&P futures today not doing a lot, though, even though we've had a better handover from Asian markets today. We'll get to that in a second. 10-year yields up 5 basis points throughout the course of the day yesterday. We saw a bit of a move upwards after those FOMC minutes came through, suggesting that not all members of the committee were unanimous in going for that 50 basis point rate cut. Some would have preferred a 25 basis point cut. So we saw an uptick in 10-year yields. Dollar yen, look at this, getting closer and closer back to that 150 mark. The theme continues to be one of strength for the greenback here. And actually, it is its biggest winning streak since 2022 for the USD. So again, a lot of strength being factored into the dollar. And then Brent sitting at around $77 here. We have ticked higher, up 0.8% as we keep a close eye on the potential Israel reprisal to Iran. Whether they end up hitting oil infrastructure is one of the big factors that's been driving that market. Similarly, we've been watching out for demand signals from China. And as we talk about Hurricane Milton, just want to flag catastrophe bonds have done really well in the last 20 years or so. This is a very long-dated chart. You can see the white outperforming other these key indices. But of course, we've had two very heavy-hitting hurricanes hit in the last couple of weeks. And so losses are mounting. And so the expectation is that losses on these catastrophe bonds could range from anything from 2% to 15%. So something to bear in mind there. But let's also talk more about how some of these Asian markets are faring. Avril Hong is in our Singapore studio, and we are seeing a rebound in Chinese markets today. Avril.
Yeah, Chinese equities are leading the gains in this part of the world today as we look ahead to Saturday's briefing from the Chinese finance minister. Hopefully, that's what markets are banking on. He fills in the blanks as far as fiscal stimulus is concerned. And ahead of that, it's also interesting as Hong Kong markets head into a long weekend, the timing of the PBOC announcement of the start of the $70+ billion liquidity tool. That certainly seems to be a boost to sentiment and helping the Hang Seng as well as these mainland equities today. Now let's flip the board, because something I also wanted to highlight is amid the volatility in stocks in China, something we've seen coming back in vogue in a way are these Chinese bonds. And the dynamic here that is also really interesting that our MLive contributor Mary Nicola has been pointing out on the blog is how regardless of whether the PBOC or rather the finance minister does come through with more concrete stimulus plans and fills in the blanks, so to speak, we could still see these bonds climbing simply because a lot of these structural issues like the high local government debt or even the deepening property market slump, these are things that need loose monetary policy. So that is a favorable environment for Chinese bonds. We could still see them catching a further bid. Jumana.
Avril, thank you so much. Now let's turn to private equity markets and focus on venture capital in the MENA region. While VC funding in emerging markets globally declined in the third quarter year on year, the Middle East and North Africa is the only region seeing investor growth. In its latest report, VC data firm Magnet says the region saw 34% year-over-year growth in the number of investors, and specifically Saudi Arabia and the UAE saw an increase on their deal counts. For more on the MENA region's appeal for investors, let's bring in Noor Sweid, founder and managing partners at Global Ventures. Great to have you with us on the show, Noor. It's good to catch up. So just looking at this latest data, I think it's interesting to note that globally there seems to have been a slowdown in these VC funding deals, but the MENA region is a bright spot. Why?
Indeed, it is very much a bright spot. So not only has the total amount of funding increased, but also 46% of that funding actually came in internationally into the region, which shows a massive growing investor appetite. Just 5 years ago, that number was less than 20%. I think that what we have in the region is this really young demographic, half the population is under the age of 30, high digital penetration, huge opportunities across many sectors, and the world is starting to pay attention. The region is getting excited about the region, and we're investing in these young and growing founders.
Yeah, so a couple of, features that we've been talking about in the context of private equity and funding is, one is the macro and the fact that interest rates have been very high, and that has translated to a higher cost of capital. What has that meant for investing in particular stages of the cycle? Because the latest reports I've been reading have suggested that long gone are the days of the big mega tickets, and people are more inclined to get involved in very early stages, smaller tickets. We're talking 1 to 5 million size as opposed to 100 million plus due to this higher cost of capital.
So we have seen a huge amount of appetite in the seed and Series A and even Series B space as companies have increased in the number of those that exist in the region. I think generally the region has not had as many mega deals. So historically, we haven't had as many unicorns or decacorns come out of the region. We are starting to see a lot more of that now, with more than a dozen that currently exist in the GCC ecosystem. So most of the deals have been at the earlier stage, which probably affects the fact that there's an increase in funding because there's an increase in appetite for this stage now.
Yeah, and what about the exits? Again, we talk about U.S. markets. There's been a bit of a drying up of activity there, but in the Middle East, actually, it's remained pretty robust. So that means that there is confidence that there will be an exit in sight and you can actually monetize your positions.
We've seen a proliferation of exits in the last 2 years compared to the years before that. So we've proven that there are exits in the market. We as a firm have had 6 exits in the last couple of years. We just had one 2 weeks ago out of our 2020 vintage portfolio at a 29x what we entered. So we've seen that. It's been wonderful. It doesn't always have to be IPOs, although Saudi Arabia has seen 35 IPOs so far this year with a target of 50, which is, again, a large increase. Several of those are tech IPOs. So we've seen an increase in IPOs, an increase in exits, and an increase in M&A across the entire ecosystem.
And for your firm specifically, where are you seeing the opportunities right now in the region?
So we are generally Series A investors. Sometimes we go a little bit later, which is great, especially as these companies do grow. Across industries, we're very excited about supply chain tech and agri-tech. So anything that really focuses on food security. We still import 85% of our food in the region.
Wow.
How do you change that from a pure tech perspective, not just indoor or vertical farming with CapEx, and as well as supply chains? We've seen a huge disruption in supply chains over the last few years, and the region's really playing to that strength.
So you mentioned agri-tech. That's interesting. Have you seen an increase in the amount of investment going into that space in the last couple of years, given, again, what we're talking about, the demographics, climate change, all of those factors contributing?
We've seen across agri-tech an increase in investments in the CapEx side, so how do you build out vertical farming? But we've also seen, for example, one of our companies reduces energy consumption for vertical farming by up to 95% because of the way they treat water, the way they treat the roofs of these farms, and they're now global companies, so they're retrofitting farms in 16 different countries. But that came out of the region because of the acute need of the region to solve for food security. The company was invented, the patents are all here in the region, and it's scaling globally to solve the same problems around the world.
Yeah, and how does that compare to other sectors that we mentioned? You know, agriculture, obviously, agri-tech, a big focus. Do you see it growing in terms of its relative importance in terms of international focus?
Very much so. So I think food security is on every government's agenda to make sure that they have enough food that is in the country and near country. And as we think about how do we feed our growing population, how do we reduce the 85% that's still imported of food, investing in that sector, not just in the UAE or in Saudi, but around the world, everyone's looking inwards to say, how can we do this ourselves? So we've seen an increase in investment. We've seen companies scaling very quickly. It's not about incremental improvements here. It's really about innovation that allows you to leapfrog and say, since we don't have a huge industry, what would great look like with the technology we have today?
So interesting. I feel like for a long time, whenever people thought about investing in the region, it was typically around fintech. So what has been going on there? I mean, do we get to peak fintech for MENA region now, and there's sort of like a maturity in that space?
We just had a fintech IPO in Saudi, so I think we're seeing a lot of large fintechs. Tabby, another great company, which we backed very early in the days, biggest BNPL in the region, or one of, and again, on path to IPO. So fintech, we invested in very actively in 2018 and 19 when those companies were very young. It's wonderful to see them maturing at this point in time. Now we always have to think about which industries 5 years from now are massively different to 5 years ago. And with that mindset, we invest at those inflection points. And we'll tell you that 5 years from now, supply chain tech and agri-tech are going to be where fintech might be today.
Yeah, so interesting. Just a final point. We had a guest on earlier on the show. He's an AI portfolio manager. And he was talking about the opportunities he sees specifically in the Middle East because it is a meeting point geographically of East and West. You get exposure to U.S. tech and you get exposure to China tech. How are you, as a VC, looking to capitalize on AI opportunities here?
So AI in the UAE, you can take a look at what's being built on data centers across the region, not just the UAE, and you can see what is the real power behind that, or you can take a look at how is it being used. We take a look more about how is it being applied in a commercial way. So now we're taking a look at an AI company that enables any e-commerce play to increase conversion from their first click to their buy from 20% to about 50%.
Yeah.
And now that's proven, there's revenue, so you can actually implement AI very quickly in ways that matter to the region from a consumer side or a supply chain side. That's where we look to invest.
Yeah, so it's essentially about screening for the companies that are applying AI most efficiently.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, Noor, great to chat to you. Thanks for coming on. Fascinating discussion. Noor Sweid, founder and managing partners at Global Ventures. Thank you. Now for a look at some of the other stories we're following. Bloomberg has learned that BlackRock is amongst firms exploring a purchase of U.S. investment company HPS Partners. Sources say the two companies have held talks as HPS also pursues a potential IPO. Multiple potential suitors are said to be weighing deals, including CVC Capital Partners. The United Nations has rejected Saudi Arabia's bid to join its Human Rights Council. This comes amid opposition from activists who say the Gulf nation remains amongst the worst human rights offenders globally. The vote is a setback for the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and his plan to reinvent the kingdom's economy and open up society. Ratan Tata, the former head of Tata Group, who transformed it into a global empire, has died, aged 86. As chairman for more than 2 decades, starting in 1991, Tata rapidly expanded through major acquisitions, including Jaguar Land Rover and steelmaker Chorus Group. His death leaves a vacuum at Tata Trust, which wields control over the conglomerate through its holdings of Tata Sons. And later today, Bank of Japan Deputy Governor Ryozo Himino is due to deliver a keynote address. Subscribers can watch the Navigating the New Japan Forum hosted by Bloomberg, streaming live online at Bloomberg.com and live go on the terminal at the times on your screen right now. But first up next, South Africa is introducing major visa reforms to attract skilled workers and boost tourism. We are live in Johannesburg. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Jumana Bersachi in Dubai. Well, some breaking news just coming through now. This from Deutsche Telekom. And the company has said that they plan share buybacks, I should say, for up to 2 billion euros in 2025. And of course, just a reminder, Deutsche Telekom owns T-Mobile in the US, so a substantial company. But look, you can see the run up to this, up 30%. And on the back of that, some of the confidence is allowing them to come out with this announcement that they're planning to do a share buyback of up to 2 billion euros in 2025. So that's just out now. Elsewhere, South Africa has announced major changes to work permit regulations as it looks to attract more professionals to its skills-starved economy and grow the tourism industry. Let's bring in our Chief Africa correspondent, Jennifer Zabazaja, who joins us from Johannesburg. Jen, so interesting. The South African, the new government, have been introducing so many new reforms. Why were these visa reforms so high up on the agenda?
Jumana, this had really been a point of contention for both the public and the private sector. I mean, if you think about unemployment here, upwards of 33%, and yet we had a number of private companies who were even reconsidering investing and expanding into this economy just because of how difficult it was to get workers online. So just to give you some context, this is a new points-based system, and they're prioritizing a lot of the skills that they don't have, mainly in engineering, science, technology, and also at the management level. But also, I think which is very important for local workers in an effort to protect lower income local workers, they have the income threshold set at double the median income for the formal sector. And so this is potentially what the South African government says, a way to not only attract skills and workers back into the economy, they also see it potentially boosting tourism. They say it could potentially create 7 new jobs for every additional skilled worker that participates in the economy. So potentially could be transformative. If they are to stick to this, they believe it could help the South African economic growth increase by 1.2%. So this is not just something to get people in. They think it could potentially have long ramifications for the economic trajectory of the economy.
Yeah, and key to unlocking some of that economic potential is the regulatory landscape. I just wonder how these visa reforms position South Africa compared to other African nations vis-a-vis these regulatory systems.
Exactly. And that was a lot of the concern. And we heard that from the new Home Affairs Minister saying that a lot of the issue was the red tape that was existing and just the bureaucracy that existed in order to get some of these visas approved. So if we take a look at regionally in Kenya, earlier this year, they also announced a new update to their own visa system. We've also seen other African countries like Mauritius, Cape Verde, Seychelles introducing, again, digital nomad visas because they are hoping to not just bring tourism in, but attract people who want to be working from home. But I think what is very important to note is that the previous visa regime here in South Africa, and again, it's still in progress, but it could take upwards of 48 weeks to get a visa processed. In Kenya, it was closer to 12 weeks. In Nigeria, closer to 8 weeks. And so potentially them cutting down a lot of this red tape could introduce quicker visas, more workers getting into the system faster, and also, hopefully setting up South Africa to get more companies to want to invest and expand and put more people on the ground. But there is still some work to do.
Bloomberg's Jennifer Zabazaja, thank you so much for bringing us that report. Well, France is considering loaning South Africa around 300 million euros. The State Development Bank is gearing up to deliver its second installment under a climate finance pact between the African nation and some of the world's richest countries. France is part of a $9.3 billion agreement. And coming up, we look at how a risky bet on gambling in the UAE is beginning to pay off for Wynn Resorts. A closer look at their winning hand next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Jumana Bersechi in Dubai. A big bet on gambling in a country where it's still technically illegal is starting to pay off for Las Vegas-based Wynn Resorts. Last week, it won the UAE's first commercial gaming license. Our Middle East finance reporter, Zainab Fatah, has been looking into the deal and joins us now. Zainab, when I look at this, I feel it's a win-win for Ras Al Khaimah, which is obviously known to be one of the poorest Emirates, but then also for Wynn Resorts, which finally got this gambling license.
Yeah, they get to operate in one of the markets where literally there is no competition. In the entire Gulf, there are no casinos. The introduction of casinos and gambling is a new industry that a lot of operators are really excited about entering, and Wynn has the first mover advantage here. So they got the license 3 years ahead of their operating date, and in many ways they expect to be able to cater to a huge number of people from China, India, and even the rest of the region.
Yeah, attract a different type of tourist clientele, I guess, than the ones that would typically come to Dubai. But Zainab, the elephant in the room here is that gambling is very much still a taboo in this part of the world, in the region. How did they navigate that, some of the social pressure around this?
They have a playbook already at hand, right? The way they introduced alcohol and allowed alcohol into the country initially. So from what we understand, this is kind of mostly going to be limited to expats and foreigners, most likely Muslims or at least citizens will not be allowed to gamble the same way it started with alcohol. At the same time, they're looking at trying to kind of avoid, when you talk to officials, they would never mention the word gambling. They will say gaming, integrated resorts. They don't want to mention the word casino. So they do all of that, but at the same time, they're keeping their eyes on the economic impact that they expect. So they think...
Well, I was going to say, why are they making this big push then, from the UAE's perspective?
Well, the push is definitely about always having this advantage over Saudi Arabia and the region around them. it's going to take a lot more for countries around them to be able to break these taboos, and they're able to always be ahead of the game. Right now, a lot of resorts are being built around the region on beautiful beaches on the Red Sea and so on, but they will be able to be the first to actually establish themselves in the gaming industry here. And when we talk about the money that's attached to this, we're talking in the billions of dollars. So some analysts at CBRE, they were talking about around $8 billion gaming revenue annually.
Wow, Zainab, big numbers there, and very, exciting development. Zainab Fatah, our Middle East real estate reporter on the latest, so the Ras Al Khaimah and Wynn Resorts. A quick look at markets because we are sitting yet another record high for these S&P futures, very close to record highs now. Well, we're slipping a little bit, but essentially we have seen the 44th biggest record high for the year, 12th record high in the last 3 months. And you can see a lot of green on the board as we head into the European session. The handover from Asia has been pretty positive as well. All eyes will be on that CPI print coming up later this afternoon. But that was Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Jumana Versace in Dubai. Stay with us for Daybreak Europe. This is Bloomberg.